So in the spirit of the holidays, I've been obviously listening to more and more Christmas music, but it was interrupted the other day by the DJ talking about the history of mistletoe.
Yeah?
And it's wild. Like you think everybody kissing under the mistletoe, but why do we do that? It dawned on me and I'm like, so apparently it dates back to like the Celtic Druids, and it was a symbol of fertility because it can grow and flourish and look green and the red berries like in the middle of winter. So it was this symbol of like,
Oh.
so that's why people started making out under it. And it made me wonder, I'm like, why aren't there missile fingers?
You would say that.
Oh, missile fingers.
I do not want to kiss anyone under a missile finger.
Well, so much I could say. Also, why are we both wearing maroon hoodies?
Oh my god, why do we do this all the time? Guys, we always dress alike, and normally one of us changes, but I'm too tired and lazy to change today.
Not happening. It's just Team Maroon. Sorry.
Exactly.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday and half past the hour.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
Happy holidays, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Murder Unscripted, the podcast that immerses you in the true crime genre like never before, while also consistently managing to zap any holiday cheer you may have with the absolute scumbag perpetrators we've covered the past couple weeks. I'm your host, Ed Hydock, along with my co-host, the Grinch, Melissa Spivey.
I love the Grinch. She's my favorite part of Christmas.
You are the Grinch.
I know.
Well, if you're tuning in on the actual day that the episode is released, Happy New Year's Eve to you. We hope you had a fantastic 2024. I know that we did. Seriously, Melissa, I'm so proud of everything that we've accomplished this year. We went from barely knowing each other to forming this amazing friendship to starting a damn podcast, and not just a regular one, like one that has a YouTube element to it. So one we actually have to produce. And we didn't miss a single week. So 32 weeks in a row. I don't know how that's possible. We put out an episode, and I don't know if people realize what it takes to make that happen for two people with full-time jobs and families. It's a lot.
It really is a lot. I'm lucky that I do the writing on our episodes, most of the writing, so I can do that with my dogs in my lap. So it
True.
totally works out. Doesn't cut into too much family time.
It's true. Well, I know I speak for Melissa when I say that we are really looking forward to 2025. We have some incredibly big things planned for Murder Unscripted, and we cannot wait to share it with you guys. And actually, at the end of this episode, we'll give you a little tease about what to expect come January.
Oh, I didn't know we were doing that. Well, I agree. I do think we're kicking January off strong. And you know what? Just a reminder to everyone, even if 2024 wasn't your best year, you survived it. So, you know what? Be so proud of yourself, because that is as much as we can ask for sometimes. So we are proud of you. We are thankful for you. And we wish everyone an amazing 2025.
It's true. Well, in our final episode of 2024, what do you have for us, Melissa? We got one more banger, right?
Oh, yeah. So the theme for this week was from Block 6, which was Friends Till the End, where we covered cases of friends turned enemies, as well as friends who sadly met their demise together. And today is along the same lines. However, we do have one happy moment from this case, and that is that we have a survivor, just like last week. So, while it is a horrific case that I'm going to talk about, it's not completely doom and gloom. And with that, are you ready to get started?
I am. Let's do it.
All right. Well, today we're going to Canada. It's our first Canadian case, so we're super excited for that.
Sounds good. That was my Canadian accent. Sounds good, eh?
It sounds good, eh? No, it's not.
It's awful. That's not when I practice in the shower. I'm sorry.
Do you practice accents in the shower?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you which ones later.
Oh, boy.
Probably not here.
Oh, boy. Well, as I mentioned, this case is kind of similar to last week because we have two victims, one of whom survives, and also similar to last week, we have a super douchey and arrogant killer. I don't know if he's worse than our shitbag from last week, but like our guy today is definitely up there. We
Awesome.
might have to do a poll, like who's worse, like the guy from last week or this week, because
I've
they're
I've never heard of anyone worse than that guy last week. Holy
all
cow.
right. Well, we'll have this conversation at the end of the episode and you can tell me who's worse.
Okay.
Real quick before I start the case, I just want to mention a few sources that I relied on heavily. One was a book entitled Through the Valley of the Shadow: The Search for the Abbotsford Killer. And that was written by Rod Gill, who was actually the team commander of the homicide task force who investigated and ultimately solved this case. So he's like a big ass deal in the case, and it was really cool to read like his thoughts as he went through it, his thoughts, his feelings.
I've told you that before, that I love when investigators write books because you do really get that. There's no more immersive story than the one told by the people who lived it.
It's so true. Yeah, it was really a fascinating story. I also watched a couple of shows. I watched an episode of I Survived, I watched an episode of Crime Stories, and I watched an episode of a show called The Devil You Know, which was really, really good.
Hmm.
So, our case today starts on Friday the 13th, 1995, which I feel like is a bad omen
Yeah, I was
already,
just gonna
but
say.
yeah. But it's Friday the 13th, and we are in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And in terms of location on a map, Abbotsford is all the way west, like right above Washington State.
Okay.
It's only about 30 minutes north of the US border and about 2.5 hours from Seattle.
Hmm.
On the map, it is like directly north of Seattle.
Okay. That's kinda where I'm heading for my first case, this new gig I got. I'm gonna be out that direction in
I know
January.
you could go visit.
I should. And I could try out my accent. "Hey, everybody, how's
They
it going, eh?
they'll be like, "Whoa, you must be from here."
Get out of here.
Clearly.
Please leave."
It's a decent sized city, and I read somewhere that it's like considered the Bible Belt of Canada,
Hmm.
which is definitely that was more true back in 1995 when our case took place. There was
Okay.
like more churches per capita than anywhere else in Canada or something. It was wild.
Hmm.
So it's Friday the 13th, and best friends, 15-year-old Misty Cockerill and 16-year-old Tanya Smith, have just gotten back to Misty's house. The girls had been at like a birthday party for one of their friends, and then they were dropped off at Misty's house, and the girls were gonna have a sleepover, like every other Friday night. It's a little before midnight, and as the girls get to Misty's house, they decide that they're not quite ready for their night to end. And since Misty's parents were still out and not planning to be home for like at least another hour or so, the girls decide to walk 5 blocks to another friend's house who was also hosting a party.
Cool, sounds like a fun night.
Right, exactly. Like they ran into Missy's house, they changed probably I think they changed like out of like heels into flats, which is such
Okay.
a girl thing to do. So the girls set off through their neighborhood, and I've never been to Abbotsford, so I don't fully know the layout of the city or the specific neighborhood. But the way they were walking, they were taking sidewalks that led past their high school and also led across the back end of a large hospital.
Okay.
So the girls are walking along the sidewalk, and in one of the shows, our survivor, who's Misty, she says that both girls were in like really good moods, having a good time, and they were actually kind of like joking. And one of them commented about like how dark and creepy it was on their walk, and they even joked, "Oh, geez, it's Friday the 13th. Hope we don't get murdered." And you know what, though? That's so real to me. Like, I've absolutely said shit like that. Like, when you and I went to the trails in Philly, we joked about, oh my gosh, we're going to end up on a true crime podcast episode. Like, we definitely said that.
That's always so haunting to me because the victims obviously are joking, but that joke is rooted in like real life stories and real life events. So they know it's a possibility. And you're right. When we're out and we see that homeless guy's shelter and that, like, you don't know what goes on back there. And it's like, we could get murdered out here. You could get murdered out there.
Yeah. But it's such a real, like, when she said that, I was like, I could totally see myself saying that. Like, I get it.
100%.
So the girls are walking down the sidewalk, and like on one side of them is the street, and the other side is this row of tall hedges, like over 12-foot tall hedges. And suddenly, out of the hedges, a dark figure emerges, holding a baseball bat. And the figure steps towards them. And before the girls even know like what's happening, the man says, "Do you bitches want to party?"
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah, and before they even like know what's going on, he just suddenly pushes them both through the hedges, and they're in this small grassy area. And Misty, our survivor, would later say that the man had just dark, crazy eyes. Like there was
Wow.
nothing behind them, which is so scary.
Yeah.
The girls are obviously scared, and as they look around, they realize they're in the very back of a mostly deserted parking lot in the back of the hospital. But like I said, it's after midnight at this point, and this was a staff lot, so there's very few
Oh,
cars. Yeah. There's very few cars, and well, the parking lot is, like, within view of the back of the hospital, and it is very well lit, but it's just really quiet and
empty.
isolated.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
terrifying when you think about where you're picture yourself in that at that time of night too. It's just you feel like you're on an island.
Yeah, and you think, like, I'm so close to civilization and other people, but so far at the same time.
Right.
So the man angrily tells both Tanya and Misty to take off their clothes, and Tanya complies while Misty does not. And Misty would later say in interviews that Tanya's eyes were just full of terror. And like, it seems to me that at this point she was almost in shock and she was just following the man's instructions almost like robotically. So as the man begins to unbutton his pants, Misty tries to fake an asthma attack. And she starts like hyperventilating and she throws herself on the ground. And unfortunately, the man is just standing there staring at her and tells her that she's faking because if she really had asthma, she would have a quote puffer.
Uh,
To which I say, it's called an inhaler, you uneducated dingleberry. A puffer? Like what?
well, I applaud Misty for trying something, to get out of
Yes.
that situation. I don't think any of us truly know what it feels like to be in her position, but good for her for trying to be savvy about it.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, she tried something. You got to give it to her. So at this point, the man had thrown Tanya on the ground and he goes back to unbuttoning his pants. And as he begins to like bend down to assault Tanya, Misty takes full advantage of the fact that he had set the bat down on the ground. And like this badass girl, she could at this point have run away and just left Tanya there. She was completely like in the position to do that. But Misty is truly the best friend like we all wish we had. And instead of running away, this badass grabs the bat and swings it as hard as she can at the attacker. But unfortunately, she like only manages to whack the bat into his shoulder and it doesn't really do too much to him, let alone like incapacitate him.
Yeah.
And at first, I'm sure it's easy for any of us to be like, "Oh, I would have bashed the guy in the head." But like
You're
that's
not
also
there.
remember, this is a terrified 15-year-old girl in probably the scariest moment of her life. It's dark out. I'm sure she's shaking. I would be because I shake when I get scared. So, like, I'm not surprised that she wasn't able to cause more damage to him. And luckily, like, her hit does manage to stun the attacker for a split second, but he's quickly able to grab the bat and he regains control. And now he's even more angry than ever. So he takes this aluminum baseball bat and just starts beating Misty in the head with no freaking mercy.
Wow.
Like, this man is a fucking monster. And Misty claims she remembers screaming at Tanya to run away,
Hmm.
all while she's like begging the man to stop and she's trying to protect herself. And as the man is hitting Misty with the bat, she's on the ground. And she talks about this in one of the interviews. She's like, I could see my high school, like from where she was laying.
Yeah.
And she talks about looking at her school and thinking, will I ever go back there? Like,
Wow.
will I ever get to go to school again? And if you think about that, like being what we just talked about, being so close to something that is familiar And like at 16 or 15 or 16, your school is like part of your safe little bubble,
Yeah. It's what you
you
know.
know?
Yeah.
Exactly. And Misty claims that she counted the man hitting her 7 times and then everything went dark.
Wow, it's just awful because to me, without knowing the story, obviously, but it appears so random. And all these two
Mhm.
girls were trying to do was go to a friend's house, and someone is just lurking around outside and looking for people to harm. It's sick. It's sick, is what it is.
It really is. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason. We never find out why he does any of this.
No, and
Like he's
even if it's a safe community, like this happens all over and apparently in Canada too. Like you aren't safe anywhere.
No, you really aren't. So, Misty, who's been severely beaten with an aluminum bat, she wakes up several hours later in the same patch of grass where the attack began. And of course, she's super confused and disoriented. And she kept thinking about how much she just wanted to get home and crawl in her bed and go to sleep. But at 4:30 a.m., this incredible young woman was able to drag her battered, bloody, broken body into the MSA hospital emergency room. And I mean, her being able to walk anywhere, let alone that far, is like a freaking miracle when you
It's
hear how
true.
badly she was beaten. So, Misty stumbles into the emergency room, and in an interview, she talked about how when she walked in, the person working like the triage desk
Yeah.
who was admitting people, the person looked at her and screamed. And Misty thought, oh man, the person who came in behind me must be a damn mess.
Oh, so she didn't even realize it was her.
Yes,
Oh
she
my
was the
god.
mess.
Wow.
Yeah. This girl had a broken arm, a broken hand. She had several severe skull fractures. It was said she had like a giant hole in her head from the bat.
Wow.
One article talked about how like she thought she had blood dripping down her face. It turns out like it was blood, but it was mixed with spinal fluid.
Oh my, how is she walking?
That makes my stomach hurt. Like it makes me want to get sick.
Yeah, I mean, she literally must have been running on pure adrenaline.
I'm sure, or like her body was probably in shock or
Yeah. Wow.
so. Even though she's like somewhat conscious and somewhat coherent, they honestly, the people at the hospital, they really didn't know if she was gonna live, even with the extensive life-saving surgery that they did on her. Like, her poor brain was so swollen.
Wow.
So, doctors and nurses, like, swarm her. Like, apparently the whole ER was just like, "Holy shit." So, doctors and nurses are just, like, trying to evaluate her, and the whole time, she's, like, kind of coherently trying to tell them about Tanya. She kept saying her friend's missing, they had been attacked, and so on. And medical staff, of course, they call police right away, but their main concern is saving Misty's life. So they're able to get some information from Misty, but they honestly don't really know like what is real and what she's hallucinating because of her head injuries.
Yeah, so that's definitely something they had to consider because it was clear this girl had no idea how badly she was injured, and the things she's saying could be complete figments of her imagination. It's called aphasia. Actually, when there's trauma to the part of the brain that controls the language and speech, and it makes you say things that you don't mean, and oftentimes things that don't even make sense.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what was happening with Misty. And, the book talked about how some of the information she gave was legit, but she also said things like her attacker was 7 feet tall and he worked at a chocolate factory. So,
It's like Slenderman.
yeah, right? Willy Wonka and
Yeah.
Slenderman mixed together.
Wow. Jeez.
So the medical staff just isn't sure what to believe. And when police arrive, like they're not really sure either. And they aren't even sure where to start because Misty wasn't able to provide really accurate information about where the attack actually physically happened. So ultimately, Misty gets moved to the head trauma unit at the Royal Columbian Hospital.
Okay.
And she would need a whole bunch of pins to repair her arm and hand. And surgeons would actually have to drill holes in her skull to help with the
Wow.
swelling.
Yeah, to relieve the pressure.
It is such a miracle this girl is alive.
It's amazing what doctors can do. I'm always
It
every
is.
time I hear these survivor stories and just the things that these victims endure and that they can be saved. It's
Yeah.
astounding.
So around 8 a.m. that morning, Misty's still in the hospital fighting for her life. About 10 miles away, a couple of fishermen come across Tanya, and it's the severely beaten body of Tanya Smith floating in the Vedder River.
Wow.
So police report to the scene, and by this point, they had spoken to Misty's parents, and her parents were able to corroborate her statement that she had been out with a friend.
Mhm.
So by that, police were able to identify that their victim was, in fact, 16-year-old Tanya Smith.
Okay.
And from looking at her and the injuries she sustained, they knew the person who had done this was obviously a violent and disturbed maniac. What police didn't know was that from somewhere hidden on the opposite side of the riverbank, the killer gleefully watched this entire scene unfold.
Wow. I've always been fascinated by that. Like why killers return to the scene and they
Mm-hmm.
sometimes even if they're lucky enough in their eyes get to watch the scene being processed. And what I found is it just deals with human nature. Like we normal people crave like things that are familiar, sentimental, like that. Like
Yeah.
that's why people feel good when they plug in their old home movies or their wedding video or they go back to the spot where they had their honeymoon. It's like
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's the same with killers, except because they're wired so weird. They're often devoid of anything good in their life or anything wholesome that makes them feel that kind of joy. So it's just if they manage to watch police process a scene, it's usually either about power or
Mm-hmm.
it's like I'm one step ahead of you or catch me if you can, that kind of thing. Or it's about genuine curiosity. So in order to stay one step ahead of them, it would be helpful if I knew what they were doing. What did they know? What have they found? That way I have the upper hand. It's really a fascinating topic.
And you saying that kind of reminds me of Ed Kemper, how he befriended and hung out at the bar where the
Yes,
cops went, and he became their friend and
just to like hear the ins and outs of their
of
investigation.
his own crimes, of
Exactly.
what they knew, which is so wild.
Crazy.
Well, a little spoiler alert, our killer loved the game.
Hmm.
So while police are investigating the scene, they notice that just down the trail a little ways, thrown up in some tree branches, were Tanya's clothes. And police think that the killer tossed them up there as a sick little, haha, here they are. Like the killer put them on display.
Yeah, that's that catch me if you can element. So it tells you exactly
Mm-hmm.
what kind of category he falls into. It's like BTK as well. Who's like
Ugh,
that? Your
BTK, the
favorite.
floppy disk.
Your boy.
What a friggin' idiot. Ugh, hate him. So the book I referenced at the beginning, which was written by, like I said, the lead guy on this case, it's super heavy in the police investigation. And it was really cool how he broke things down and explained the process. And as I said earlier, the police went full force with this investigation from day one. And that's something that we don't always see. And this actually had multiple police departments working together and actually working well together.
That's awesome. I mean, to be fair though, we're in Canada where the literal nicest people in the world live. So
That's true. This attack took place under Abbotsford PD's jurisdiction, but Tanya's body was found in a location that was under the Chilliwack RMPD's jurisdiction,
hmm.
which is the Royal Mounted Police Department, I
That's
believe.
like the FBI in Canada.
Yes. And we know from other investigations, departments don't always work super well together, and sometimes it turns into an inflated ego pissing match.
That's what it is. Who wants credit for solving it? And that sucks because the real people's lives are at stake.
Well, and that's why I feel so many crimes never got solved because of shit like that.
Yeah, they didn't want to ask for help or they didn't want the help.
Exactly. Well, with this case, it's almost like the absolute depravity of the crime brought everyone together in this joint mission to get this horrifically evil maniac monster off the streets.
Good. Good to hear.
And I also want to give them credit for their protection of Misty. Right from the start, authorities were concerned that the killer would find out that Misty had survived and that he would come back and try to kill her.
I would worry about that too. And the second a news story comes out, if the killer's following along like he claims to be, he's gonna know she's alive because there's gonna be a story about her.
Police actually had an officer guarding her hospital room 24 hours a day.
Good.
And this officer was equipped with a tape recorder, like just in case she started making any statements about the attack and murder.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I will say, I think I mentioned it later, but after she gets out of the hospital, she and her entire family were put in witness protection for a while.
Wow. That's serious, yeah.
Yeah. So by October 17th, this is 4 days after the attack, police had made a little bit of progress in the case. They had been able to narrow down to like a reasonably small area where the attack actually happened. And they did get some good news from Misty's medical team. She was slowly regaining consciousness, and while it was too early for like any guarantees, the doctors were becoming more and more confident that she would likely survive.
That's awesome, given everything she went through.
Seriously, like she's a miracle. I don't know how she survived it.
Crazy.
So also that day, October 17th, was Tanya's autopsy. And this would actually provide some really valuable information. First of all, Tanya's injuries were very similar to Misty's. She had clearly been viciously attacked with the aluminum baseball bat. But get this, Tanya didn't die from those injuries. And actually, had she gotten medical attention, there's a decent chance she would have survived. But unfortunately, she was thrown face down in the water after she had been attacked, and she was most likely
So
unconscious.
she drowned.
Yep, the
Ugh,
medical examiner found water in her lungs, confirming that
wow.
she died by drowning.
That sucks. That's my obviously completely different, but that's like drowning's up there on my fears of ways to die. It's like
Me
number
too.
2. Fire's number 1, but drowning's sounds scary.
Fire and drowning, yeah, are definitely my top
Mhm.
ones. That's
Wow.
terrifying. This next part's actually incredible. So even though Tanya was found in the water, the medical examiner was still able to find semen on her genitals, and there was like enough of it to swab.
Wow.
So now they had DNA. And like the incredible part I was referring to is that the water didn't wash it away, not that it happened.
Well, yeah, it's amazing that I'm not sure how deep the was it the Eddie Vedder River, whatever it is,
The
the
Vetter River, yeah.
I don't know how deep it was, but maybe it was the way she was positioned. Maybe but like I feel like if you were submerged fully, that would wash away.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I do know in the book they talked about how deep it was, and I believe at that time of year, it was about like you could wade to the middle of it and only be like waist deep water.
So maybe that part wasn't fully submerged. I don't know.
Yeah, but
Hmm.
thank goodness it was there. I mean, that was a huge
Yeah.
help for the investigation.
Hmm.
So during the autopsy, the Emmy also discovered a bite mark on Tanya's right breast. So a
Hmm.
forensic odontologist, Dr. Sweet, he was called in and he was able to determine that there were enough distinguishing characteristics of the bite mark to compare to someone.
Mhm.
And Dr. Sweet was able to use like this new kind of technique to swab for DNA in the bite mark.
Hmm.
And like again, how freaking cool is that they could still get all this DNA even though she had been in the water?
Yeah, they use those little it's the swabs that have the point so they can really get in the grooves of the teeth. And
Yeah.
they really but like the technique itself isn't overly specialized, but to be able to go in there and really get the saliva samples out of those holes is pretty wild.
But keep in mind, we are in 1995. So like DNA is definitely gaining notoriety in the investigatory and forensic world.
Mhm.
But, like, everyone was still a little cautious of it, and in order for them to use it in court, the courts actually required the DNA to be tested several times to ensure the results were correct. So, the time frame for these results was at least 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, and I feel like that's people don't always understand that, and you can thank CSI, the show
Yeah.
CSI for helping to coin that term. You've heard of that, the CSI effect? It's pretty common
Yes.
these days. But basically, for those who don't know, it's the phenomenon that people have watched CSI so much in these crime shows that they think stuff happens overnight because we have to condense it to 44 minutes or 24-minute, whatever it is. So it feels like it happens so quickly, but it takes months. And usually when during the voir dire process, when jurors are being asked, they're asked about the CSI effect. Do you believe in it? Do you understand that this stuff takes time? So it's a real thing.
It is weird, like, you watch Law& and Order SVU, and they get the results back immediately,
Mhm.
and then, you read about cases, and you're like, "Well, what the hell's taking so long?"
Right, right.
So, while investigators wait for the DNA results to come back, shit is about to get crazy. So, the next day, October 18th, 1995, proves to be a super busy day. First of all, Misty is fully awake and finally more coherent, and unfortunately, this is when her mother breaks the devastating news that Tanya did not survive the attack.
Wow, that's a
Up
shame.
until then, when she was kind of in and out of consciousness, they just said, like, yeah, Tanya's in another room. Like, so they did have to tell her that.
That had to hit her like a ton of bricks.
Oh, she was absolutely devastated. I mean, I can't imagine going through the whole situation at any time, like, let alone being a 15 or 16-year-old kid.
Right, right. I mean, it's and you have to remember too that Misty has the added trauma of losing her best friend and the survivor's guilt. You know.
Mhm. The survivor's guilt would be we talked about that last week with
Mhm.
Christy, like, that would be so hard.
Yeah, and it's just you're such a good person. That's the only thing I can attribute it to is that you're just so used to caring about other people that even though stuff's happening to you, it's like, what's happening to my friend?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in a testament to how truly amazing Misty really is, the news of Tanya's death seemed to actually, like, ignite a fire in her. Like, that was like her point where she was like, she can't feel sorry for herself. She has to get better, and she has to help investigators solve this. Like,
Good for
not
her.
only for herself, but also for Tanya. So, Misty goes on to provide some more information to police about how when she regained consciousness after the attack, she was able to use a chain link fence to she kind of hung onto the fence as she made her way to the hospital.
Mhm.
She said that she did stop at one point and she, like, laid down and fell asleep in a random person's garden.
So she's like remembering like landmarks almost, things to help pinpoint.
Yep. So, but then she was able to get up and continue using the fence, and that's how she made her way to the ER.
Hmm.
So, while the officers are at the hospital getting, talking to Misty, getting this information, other investigators are back at the command center and they're fielding tips coming in via the tip lines. And one officer gets a very strange call from a man claiming that he was the one to drive Misty to the hospital after the attack, but he wanted to remain anonymous because he didn't trust the police.
So first of all, it's the guy. You know it's the guy taunting them, but also didn't she walk there? So only he
Yeah,
would know. So if he actually drove her, either she didn't remember because of the head trauma, or
right.
he's making it up, as in he's the only one who knew she didn't get a ride there.
Well, and that's the thing. When they hear this, police are like, okay, so maybe she did get a ride.
Yeah.
Because they're
Hmm.
really still like, how the heck did she manage to do this?
Yeah.
But when the officer tries to push the tipster a little bit further, the tipster hangs up. So police were actually luckily able to track this phone call, and it came from a payphone outside of a Circle K gas station and a convenience store. But by the time police arrived at the location, the caller was gone. So this is still October 18th, and police are still trying to figure out the exact spot of the assault. So they have police dogs out searching like the general area where Misty thought they were. And one of the dogs actually hits on something because dogs are freaking amazing.
They are amazing.
So in the bushes, they find a broken earring that was confirmed to have belonged to Misty. So, like, this is really good news. They finally know where the girls, or at least where Misty, was attacked. But the bad news, it had been raining for a few days, which means any potential evidence had been washed away.
Hmm.
But, like, the good thing was, at least they had an exact location, so they're happy with this. And then they get word that their potential murder weapon has been found.
Ooh.
Yeah. A farmer was walking along his property and he had found an aluminum baseball bat near a road that the killer would have had to have taken to get to the spot in the river where Tanya's body was found.
Yeah. So he just heaved it out of the car or something.
Yep, just threw it out the window. So police are like, they're not 100% sure it's a murder weapon, but they do submit it for testing to see if they can find any blood or other evidence on it.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been a big day already,
Yeah.
but it's going to get bigger. A little bit after 4:30 p.m., it gets crazier. So back at the command post, Rob Gill, remember, he's like one of the heads of the investigation, and he's the author of the book. He's sitting there, and one of the tip lines rings, and Rod picks it up, and immediately a man's voice comes on the line and says, quote, "I know where the murder happened," end quote.
Mm-hmm.
And Rod is thinking like, holy shit. So he presses the record button on the phone. The man continues by saying, quote, "Beside a walkway that runs north and south on a grassy knoll behind trees." And Rod is like shocked because investigators, remember, they had only just found out about the location that day, a couple hours prior.
Right.
So he replies and he's like, "Oh, okay, sir, where are you getting this from?" And the caller responds, and this is vulgar, so I apologize. But he says, quote, "I'm the killer. Her right nipple tasted pretty good," end quote. And then he hangs up.
He's toying with police at this point because I imagine that information had not been made public yet.
It was not. So that was actually never made public until like after everything was said and done. So they're using this like, no one should know that information except the people in this room and like the medical examiner.
Yeah, because you don't want anybody. A bite mark is pretty conclusive evidence. I mean, that's as it can be, as it's like a snowflake. It's like unique to you. I mean, your bite pattern. So if the killer gets wind of that, he could have dental work, he could have teeth pulled. You know what I mean? There's you don't want to lead on that you have that kind of evidence.
So at this point, everyone in the room is like staring at Rod, and it takes him a split second to absorb and process what the hell just happened with this caller. And he goes, "Wow, shit, let's get a trace on this." And I can't even imagine how he felt in that moment. Like his whole body was probably like in shock. So they trace the call and they discover it came from a payphone across from a hockey arena because it's Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I picture them like Wawa's. Like there's one on every corner, a hockey arena.
That's how that's what I picture as well. So when police get to the scene, they realize that the payphone was in like a super busy area. There were businesses, there was a little park, and it had been a nice day, so the park was really busy. They went and they talked to everyone, and not a single person even noticed anyone making a call. But of course, the cops do their due diligence and they dust the phone for fingerprints, they swab it for DNA, and so on. So at 6:08 p.m. that very same day, a call came into the Abbotsford 911 operator. When the operator asked if the caller needed police, ambulance, or fire, the caller responded and said police. So the caller then said, quote, "Your guys do a real thorough job, but do you think I would be stupid enough to leave fingerprints behind when I make a phone call?" End quote.
He was watching them dust for fingerprints.
Yep.
Man.
He was watching.
"Do you think I would be stupid enough to leave fingerprints behind when I make a phone call?"
Crazy.
So police hear the call and like they know that the voice is the same voice as the previous call that had come in that day. But this time, for some reason, the tracking doesn't work. So they don't know where the call came from. So now the police are like, holy shit, like this guy was clearly watching us at the payphone by the hockey arena. And now they're like wondering if he somehow managed to mess with the tracking system.
That'd be, for 1995, that'd be pretty sophisticated if he did.
Yeah, and it's never said one way or another, so I think it just happened to not work for that one, but
yeah,
it sucks. So they didn't have very long to stew on this because minutes later at 6:29 p.m., the man called 911, and again, he asked for the police when the operator asked who he was calling for. And he then proceeded to ask the 911 operator, quote, "Are you having trouble catching the killer?" End quote. And the 911 operator's like, I don't know. Do you have anything you want to tell us? Do you want to provide some information? And the caller says, No, I'm the one. And then he goes on to say, quote, I'm giving you the chance to try and find me. I'll be driving around looking for someone else, end quote.
I'm the one giving you the chance to try and find me. I'll be cruising around looking for someone else.
Wow, that's chilling. And like
Yeah.
I'm sure that operator is like, I don't recall this from 911 Operator University. Like the situations like this.
I don't know what I would say. I'd
Yeah.
probably start laughing because I
You
laugh
would
when I
start
get
laughing.
nervous.
That's
I
exactly
would,
what you'd say.
yeah.
You cannot be a 911 operator.
No, oh, yikes. I wouldn't make it through day one. So the 911 operator asked the caller to provide their name, to which the caller responded with, quote, just to let you know who I am, Tanya's right nipple tasted really good, end quote. And with that, he hung up.
Didn't he just say that?
Yeah, he said it in the call earlier, and then he says it again to, like, prove who he is, I
Oh,
guess.
like drive home the point that this is who you're
Yeah.
talking to. Yeah.
This guy's sick.
911 emergency, please fire ambulance. Just to let you know who I am. Tanya's right nipple tasted really good.
So, luckily, the tracking system does work this time, and the investigators discovered the call was placed from a payphone at a little convenience store. Blocks, like 2 blocks from the police
So
station.
close. Wow.
Isn't that so crazy?
Yeah, he's daring police to catch him.
Absolutely. So the police like raced over the payphone just like they did with the prior calls, but no one noticed anything strange, nor did they notice anyone making any calls. So the next day, October 19th, 1995, Misty is feeling well enough to work with a forensic artist to create like a sketch of her attacker. So the sketch is made and it's released the next day to all the media outlets, and everyone is like on the lookout for this guy in the sketch. The only problem is that the sketch really looked nothing like our killer, who we will eventually find, but like the sketch, and we're going to put a picture up. But Ed, do you want to describe this picture for our listeners?
It's like a skinny dude, long black hair, a mustache. It looks like every killer. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an evil looking picture.
And he's kind of like bald at the top, but yeah, you're right. He's got like dark hair.
Yeah.
And once you see a picture of the actual killer, you're like, I'm sorry, what?
And that's the risk you take. I mean, you're with a victim that had so much trauma. You're wondering what she recalled, what was real, what's not. So I think police run a big risk putting that picture out because it could do more harm than good, because any tip that comes in, you have to spend time and manpower to vet. And if it looks nothing like the guy, you're spinning your wheels.
Well, and that's what I mean. Like, I feel like as they did such a great job with this case, but I also feel like Misty had just been brutally beaten in the head, and like we have no idea what kind of damage that might have done to different parts of her brain. So
Right.
I kind of felt like that was a weird move on their part, but what do I know?
Right.
So later that week, October 21st, 1995, 16-year-old Tanya Selena Smith was laid to rest. Hundreds of people came out to say their goodbyes, and police were there for the funeral. They were at the church, they were at the burial afterwards, and they had cameras set up. So like every person who was there was recorded. License plates all recorded. But nothing really came of that, and they didn't notice anyone suspicious. And again, what they didn't know at the time, the killer was there.
Wow.
And even more disturbing, the killer was there and he had brought his 2 young children to the funeral.
He has kids? Oh my God. That's awful. Like, and it changes the whole, not the complexion of the case, but how I feel about this guy at the end.
Oh yeah. This guy has kids. He has a wife. He has a full-time job. He's a family man.
I anticipated him being a normal dude, but when you have kids, if you tell me later he has daughters, like it's a whole new level of sick.
I think he had a son and a daughter.
Awful.
So sick. But we're not quite there yet, so hold on. Stick a pin in it. So after Tanya's funeral, the investigation was still moving forward, but the next week and a half was pretty quiet. Although the people in Abbotsford were absolutely freaking terrified. Like I told you, this just crippled the city.
I'm moving back to Alberta. I'm not going to wait around to be killed. Something has to be done. They have to do something. Because we're losing our kids to these monsters, and he phones the police and he says he's going to do it again.
So now it's Halloween, Tuesday, October 31st, 1995, and so many people like refuse to let their kids out to trick or treat, which I 100% get. And I feel like the police were definitely on high alert as well. Like it's Halloween night. This killer is clearly a maniac and wants attention, so God only knows what he's capable of.
Well, yeah, and you let Halloween go on as planned, and it's like leading lambs to the slaughter.
Yeah, you're almost like, here you go. Here's a bunch of trillion little kids, and hey, while you're at it, wear a mask. Like,
Yeah, right.
so over the next few days, police call in every connection that they have. And again, I just want to give so much credit to these investigators. They did everything they could to solve this case. I mean, they worked with criminal profilers. They even worked with linguistic experts who reviewed the recordings and confirmed it was the same caller each time.
Well, yeah, you're grasping at straws. You're looking for any little shred of evidence they can find this guy.
Yeah, and like these linguistic experts, they confirmed that the caller was not disguising his voice in any way, because that was another question the police had. And they were also able to say that the caller didn't have any type of accent. So, like, they couldn't pinpoint where he might be from or his ethnicity or, like, anything like that. So, now the police have this information. They're ready to release edited clips of the phone calls to the media. So, on November 6th, police had a press conference and they played a clip of the recordings, and they said, like, anyone with information, please call the police tip line.
I'll be cruising around looking for someone else.
And this next part is kind of cool. They were also like, oh, and if you want to hear this clip again, please call this 1-800 number. And get this, the 1-800 number was set up so, like, if the same phone number called it 3 times or more, it would flag the phone number and police would get info on who owned that phone number.
That's awesome, because they knew this guy based on his previous like interactions that he's going to want to hear that. He's going to want to listen to himself and hear this stuff over and over and over.
Yep. So, like, if you kept calling, it was going to flag, like, this person's interested.
Wow.
So in mid-November, Misty was finally released from the hospital. And like I said earlier, she and her family were put in witness protection. And the next few months go by, and like at one point they did arrest a suspect who looked a lot like the sketch. And this guy had a very extensive criminal background, but he ended up being ruled out by DNA and by the bite mark. So now we're in mid-February and no one has heard from the killer. And the investigators are like, what is going on? What is he up to? And at this point, thanks to like several experts in criminology and criminal behavior and profiling, the police were beginning to feel like they had a decent handle on the inner workings of this guy's brain. Meaning, like, they had figured out that this guy loved the attention his crimes are getting. So they decided to use this to their advantage. So on February 6th, newspapers released a story about how police and like forensic psychologists believed that the Abbotsford killer had lost his nerve and left the area.
No, they were trying to poke the bear.
Well, their little trick worked. And on Saturday, February 17th, 1996, the killer made it abundantly clear that he had not gone anywhere and he was not afraid to get caught. This is so messed up. So that day, a call came into Abbotsford's local radio station, Radio Max. And the call came into the radio station's like contest line. So when the DJ answered the phone, you know, he answers, he says, "Thanks for calling Radio Max. This is whoever." And the caller says, "Go outside and check the Radio Max car." And then the caller hangs up. So this DJ, this guy Mike, he decides to go out to the parking lot and he's like, what is this guy talking about? So he goes out to the parking lot, goes to where the Radio Max car is parked, and this DJ is shocked and disgusted and horrified to find an almost 200-pound headstone sitting on the radio station's car.
Oh, shit.
The killer had stolen Tanya's
It was hers.
headstone from
Oh
the
my God.
cemetery. And he left it there in broad daylight on
How
the
do you
hood
do
of this
that?
radio station car.
How do you get away with that? Now, I get that 95 security cameras weren't as popular as they are today, but holy cow, like that's not easy.
No.
Like, it's as difficult as it is strange.
It's so strange, but it gets worse. The killer had defaced the headstone by like writing and scribbling it all over it with like a marker pen. And before I tell you what he wrote, like I want to explain her headstone a little bit. It was the kind that had like an actual photo of her on
Oh,
it.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, like it was like a small black and white picture of Tanya. So this fucking shitbag wrote the following things on his murder victim's headstone. Quote, "She was not the first. She won't be the last. I'm still looking. One day, Misty, and you won't find me." So he's
Wow.
threatening Misty as well. Then there's an arrow that he drew on the picture of Tanya, and next to that arrow, he wrote, quote, "Yummy tit."
It's what an absolute monster. And
He's
like, there's
disgusting.
no other way to describe him.
Imagine Tanya's poor family. Like, everything they'd already gone through. And then when they just want this poor girl, their beloved daughter, to rest in peace, this fucking maniac desecrates her grave marker. Like, what is wrong with people?
I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever get an answer to that.
No, I mean, this I think is the sickest part of this entire case. Like, when I read that, when I was looking for cases, I was like, oh my God, we gotta talk about this.
Yeah, it's a wild development.
Yeah. So it's a few days later now, February 19th, and another call comes in to 911. And when this call was tracked, it came from a payphone only 2 blocks from the police station. So the 911 operator answers the call and asks the caller, "Do you need police, fire, or ambulance?" And the caller responds with, quote, "How did you like the present I gave you guys, huh?" And the 911 operator tells the caller that she can't hear him. And so he repeats the question, asking, "How did you like the present I gave you?" He follows this up with, "It won't be the last." So, like, he's obviously referring to the headstone as
Well,
the
yeah.
major air quotes present he gave them.
111 emergency, do you need police, fire, ambulance? How would you like my present I gave you guys? Huh? I'm sorry, sir, I can't hear you, sir. How would you like my present I gave you guys? I'm sorry, I can't hear you loud. Take care of the shit.
He's just absolutely loving this game of cat and mouse he's playing with police. And of course, he isn't done. So 2 days later, on February 21st, it's about 10:30 p.m., and this random woman and her kids are just sitting in their living room. They lived in the middle of Abbotsford. Suddenly, something comes flying through their front window. It smashes their front window glass, and this object lands like right in the middle of their living room. So this incredibly frightened young mother who's home alone with her little kids calls police, and when they arrive, they're like looking at the object. It turns out to be an envelope that was taped to like a super large metal wrench.
Wow.
On the envelope, the following message was written: "From the Abby killer, called 911. So inside the envelope were clippings of different news articles, including one with a picture of Misty, and the killer had written, "Lucky to be alive," across her forehead in the picture.
So there must have been, I mean, her name must have been plastered in the media, because now he probably regrets not finishing her off.
Oh, I'm sure. So the other newspaper articles in the envelope are from 1989. So like 6 to 7 years prior to where we are in our story, which
Weird.
is super strange.
Yeah.
But making everything even scarier is that these news articles from 89, they were about 3 unsolved murders of women. So in addition to the newspaper clippings, there's a letter. And this letter was super vulgar and once again mentioned the bite mark on Tanya. And then the killer also wrote some cryptic messages about other attempted sexual assaults that he was now taking credit for. And he refers, this is foul. This makes my skin crawl, but he refers to these crimes as a few more of his conquests.
Yeah, and I believe him too. I believe he did it.
Yeah. Ugh,
Yeah.
he's sick.
It's not just him running his mouth about unsolved crimes. I fully believe he is responsible for whatever he's saying he did.
He ends up getting convicted for 2 of them, I believe.
Wow.
And then in this letter, he adds that he'd committed several other crimes in other Canadian territories and even Washington state. And he's just like taunting police in the letter, very similar to our douchey-ass killer last week. And our killer this week, he writes, quote, "You cops getting a little pissed off yet? Hard to catch someone who is smart, not like some stupid crooks," end quote. Which I thought of what that idiot wrote last week. Like, you think y'all are so smart.
It's like the same case, just in Canada.
Right? It's wild similarities.
Yeah.
One good thing does come from this incident because investigators are able to find a fingerprint that was on the tape used to attach the envelope to the wrench.
Nice.
So the investigation, like, they are pumped. And due to the brutal nature of the crime and just like all the other bullshit our killer was pulling, cops assumed this guy was like a career criminal and that his prints would be in the system. So they're like jazzed. They're like, we're going to get him.
Yeah.
But on February 22nd, they were hit with the news that there were no matches to this fingerprint.
That sucks.
Yeah. And they also ran it through the database in the United States and still no match. So like this kind of threw everybody for a loop and kind of made them rethink everything, including the way they were investigating.
Well, sure.
So by the end of April 1996, there had been no more phone calls, no more letters. So at 10 a.m. on April 30th, 1996, police had a press conference, and again, they played like a cleaned up version of the calls so people could clearly hear the killer's voice. And they also announced a $40,000 reward. At 1:20 that day, the police would receive a call from a woman who sounded absolutely hysterical. She was just so shaken up. And this woman tells the officer that she had listened to the recordings of the killer and she was pretty sure she knew who it was. Her own son, 30-year-old Terry Grant Driver.
Wow, that's an awesome development. And man, would I love it if this guy ended up being caught by his mom, because clearly she didn't raise him with any like morals or human decency. So the least she could do at this point is help convict him and then like end his reign of terror, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Isn't that wild that his own mommy turns him in?
It's awesome.
So this woman would go on to say that although her son didn't match the sketch of the killer, which we talked about earlier, the voice and her son's own like demonic actions persuaded her to make this call to police.
Wow.
Apparently, Terry had a car similar to one seen in like the area prior to a few of the calls that had been made to taunt police. And Terry was also an avid fisher at the Vedder River, like exactly where Tanya was found. He had gone to Tanya's funeral. He told his family about that. And he lived right near where one of the phone calls was made.
Crazy.
So the woman doesn't want to like give her name, but she's fine giving his name. So she hangs up and then she calls back about an hour later with more suspicions. So she says that her son Terry, he had a police scanner and that he had made threats to family members during a family gathering back in October of 95, like very shortly after the assault and the murder of Misty and Tanya.
Yeah.
So who is this guy? Terry Driver was born on January 27th, 1965. He was one of 4 kids to Grant and Audrey Driver, although Grant and Audrey would later divorce, which definitely messed with Terry.
Yeah.
So Terry was like a troubled child right from the start. He was actually born with some sort of brain damage, and he was labeled as an unmanageable child. In a weird parallel to Richard Biegenwald, the New Jersey thrill killer that I covered a few weeks ago, by the age of 5, Terry was sent to a special care facility. That's like what happened to Richard, like when he was 5 after he tried to set the house on fire.
Wow.
Yeah, but unfortunately, this facility didn't seem to offer much help as like Terry was just such an angry child. He lashed out with violence against other children and animals. So these red flags are flying. So we will find out during trial that Terry was apparently diagnosed with ADHD, OCD, and Tourette syndrome, all of which he would later try to blame his actions on.
I have no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1988, Terry meets this woman named Val, and within a few weeks, Terry and Val get married. And if we had more time, I would love to go into the relationship between Terry and Val. It was not a good one. It was not a good marriage, not a good relationship. Val stayed out of the spotlight for a very long time, but she was on that The Devil You May Know show. So Val was actually 10 years older than Terry. They met when he was 22 and she was 32. And like, she had a really good job. She was established. She had her own home. And when she met Terry, I think she just wanted to get married and settle down as soon as possible. And at first, Terry was Prince Charming. But of course, like the cracks in his perfect exterior started to show very, very quickly. And almost immediately, Terry became controlling and dominating about everything. Like where Val went, who Val talked to, on and on. And he was just spending money left and right, and he quickly landed the couple in serious debt. It wasn't until after the birth of their children, one in 1991 and another in 1992, that Terry's controlling ways turned into like seriously violent aggression. He would just go into rage mode and start punching walls, break furniture. And during this time, he was spending a lot of time on 2 hobbies, I guess. Like he started fishing a lot and staying out for a few days at a time, always claiming to be on a fishing trip.
Did he ever have fish? Like to come back with? Look what I caught.
Sometimes, apparently. And hobby number 2 was basically like being a groupie of the police force, which again is very Ed Kemper.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So Terry like loved listening to police scanners, and he loved going to calls and like watching everything, which I feel like is so weird, but I know that people do it.
Yeah.
And his dad had actually been a cop, and Terry himself had attempted to be a police officer, but due to his whatever issues he had, he couldn't get in. But he was just obsessed with this police scanner, and some nights he would tell Val that he was just going to go drive around and like look for police activity. Just so weird.
It is weird. She's like, okay.
Yeah, she's like, all right, bye.
And he's got frozen fish on a hook that he got at the grocery store. Yeah.
Well, pretty soon, Terry literally would become police activity when he just started becoming like more and more unglued. Cops actually came to the house once because a neighbor called complaining that Terry was standing in front of his window masturbating.
What?
Yeah. And like another time he was cleaning a gun and it just randomly discharged and the bullet flew through the wall and hit a fence outside. And like the police just happened to be in the area dealing with something else when this like stray bullet just goes whizzing through the air. God. But of course, Terry manages to talk his way out of both of these incidents.
His tastes were changing, you know. Watching cops was a drug, and I think he was getting off on that feeling of being one step ahead of them, and eventually he needed more and more and more, which is why he ended up in this situation doing what he did. Is my analysis, my uneducated analysis.
No, my uneducated self agrees with you. So back to April 30th, Terry's mom has now outed him and police are ready to confront him. So a little after 4 p.m. that day, a team of 9 officers set up surveillance on Terry's home. And at 5:17 p.m., Terry pulled into his driveway. And like at this point, I think the officers were just so done with his shit and his games. And they just decided to like go in and be just upfront with him. And, like, they didn't tell him that his mom turned him in. All they said was that someone had identified him as a possible suspect and they needed to talk to him. And apparently Terry was cool, calm, collected. Like, he didn't give off any, like, they couldn't get a read on it, basically. And he allowed them to interview him, still remaining calm. But he declined when officers asked him to give fingerprints and or DNA. So police allow him to leave because they really don't have anything to like hold him on. But a few hours later, they call Terry and they ask him again to submit DNA and or fingerprints. And again, he's like, I'm good. But you know what? I'll speak to a lawyer and I'll hit you guys up tomorrow.
Not so cocky anymore, are you? Now he's feeling the heat.
Uh-huh. Exactly. So this next part is friggin' great. So on May 3rd, 1996, Terry finally agrees and he allows police to take his fingerprints. And he comes to the station with his lawyer, this guy, G. Jack Harris. And like Terry and the lawyer had like this whole list of demands that like, you can do this, you can't do that, whatever. And it seems like this defense attorney was kind of cocky, like kind of a cocky asshole.
Well, then they're two peas in a pod. They belong together then.
We're made for each other.
Yeah.
So an expert in forensic identification, this guy, Constable Jerry Ennis, he takes Terry's prints, and after about 20 minutes of him like carefully comparing them to the print that was left on the tape, the prints are a match.
Nice.
And it does not get more Canadian than this, but apparently Terry had like a little mark in his fingerprint that looked like a hockey stick, and it was like one of the big things they used for the comparison. They were like, oh, look at the hockey stick.
That's actually hilarious. I was expecting you to say like moose antlers or something, but hockey stick's kind of a close second.
I feel like a maple leaf would have been number one, and hockey stick is number two.
That's awesome.
So our main man here, Rod Gale, had the honor of telling Terry and his lawyer the news. Rod said, quote, Mr. Harris, your client's print is a match.
Excellent.
And with that, they arrested the Abbotsford killer.
About time. Wow.
So, they already had the fingerprint match, and over the next few weeks, they got DNA samples, and that was taken and tested, and so were Terry's like dental records and compared to the bite mark. And again, of course, everything matched. So when it comes time for trial, Terry and his defense team, they had the option of having the case handled by a judge or having it handled by a jury. In this case, they chose the judge.
A judge will be kind of just stick to the law, where a jury will hear these things and instantly be swayed. So that was probably on his part a smart move.
Oh, 100%. A jury's not going to be cool with this monster killing and raping a child.
Right.
So the trial lasted about 20 days, and it was intense. Terry actually had a ton of supporters, including his mother, who turned him in and then I guess was like, oh, just kidding? I don't know.
Yeah.
So when Misty was brought up to testify, this amazingly beautiful, badass woman, she's now 18 years old, she's up there on the stand, and she is strong, she is confident, and she is so damn tough. And apparently, like, the whole time, she just kept her eyes on Terry. Like, she was not going to show any fear. And my God, when I was reading this, I was like, you go, girl. I was so freaking proud of her.
That's awesome. I mean, it takes a ton of courage, and I'm proud of her for doing that. I can't imagine after everything she'd been through to face him.
That's got to be terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, the last time you saw him, he was trying to kill you.
With a bat.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that Terry had Tourette's and ADHD and OCD, and while the defense didn't try to use these to like back up an insanity defense, they would use all three afflictions in an attempt to explain his behavior. So the whole trial was like long and drawn out, but essentially Terry's story was that he just happened to be out the night of Tanya's murder. He was listening to his police scanner when he suddenly saw a shadowy figure emerge from the tall hedges, the ones I talked about in the beginning. And Terry decided to see where the guy came from, and that's when he saw Tanya and Misty lying in the grass unconscious. And Tanya's naked, Misty's dressed. And he was just going to leave them there, but then he decided that since he hadn't heard anything about the girls on the scanner, that meant police didn't know that, like, there were two unconscious girls lying there. So he decided it would be a good idea to go rape the unconscious children that he just so happened to, air quotes, find. Oh, and he also claims that he didn't actually bite Tanya's nipple. He was sucking on her breast and she convulsed, and that caused him to bite her.
I've heard some like ridiculous defenses before, but this one might take the cake. I mean, this is up there with like she fell on the knife and then twisted it on the stump.
Yes.
Come on.
Ridiculous. So he says that he then loaded both girls into his car. He dropped Misty at the hospital. And then because he was afraid he was going to get blamed for murdering Tanya, he dumped her in the river. Lies, lies, and more lies.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, on October 16th, 1997, almost like exactly 2 years after the attack happened, after hearing from all parties involved and reviewing all the evidence, Justice Wally Opal was ready to deliver his verdict. Justice Opal said in part, quote, "In summary, I'm satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused is guilty as charged on count 1, end quote, which was the murder of Tanya Smith. And the judge followed that up with a guilty verdict in the attempted murder of Misty Cockerill. He then sentenced Terry Driver to life in prison without possibility of parole for 25 years for Tanya's murder and 10 years for the attempted murder of Misty. And the 10 years was to be served concurrently. And Justice Opal would go on to emphasize that life means life.
Yeah, but I feel like that still leaves the door open for a chance of parole, so it doesn't mean life.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt. But he then asked Terry if he had anything to say. And again, just like last week, these killers have so much to say until they're in trouble. And then all of a sudden, they got nothing. And Terry responded no. And the trial was over. Now, back to like those cases from earlier, Terry would later be convicted of 2 assaults on women that he had mentioned in one of the letters. And this would ultimately get him labeled as a dangerous offender. Like he was given that designation. And that basically means like in Canada, like he would never get out. You're not getting parole pretty much.
Right.
Now, this next part pisses me off. Terry's stupid ass mom and brother ended up getting the reward money.
You wonder because they didn't come out until that reward was offered. So you wonder if they knew this before, but we're just kind of waiting. Wow.
And like they actually didn't end up getting the money though until I think he had exhausted all of his appeals. So I don't know, but that kind of pisses me off. I don't feel it. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah.
But you know what? Let's end this on a positive note in our
Please.
final episode of 2024. First of all, Terry Driver is dead.
Nice.
He passed away in prison from natural causes in 2021 at the age of 56 years old.
Oh, man, I was hoping it was like some kind of painful cancer, not just natural causes.
I know,
Lame.
right? Something, maybe like another inmate beat him with a baseball bat. That'd
be nice, yeah. Eye for an eye.
Right? Well, Misty is amazing, first of all, but Misty Cockerill has gone on to mostly recover from her injuries. She ended up finishing high school. She went to college. And now she still lives in Abbotsford, but she's a bereavement counselor for families of homicide victims. And she's an advocate for victims' rights.
Nice.
And she goes around and shares her story. And she says, quote, "We were victimized by Terry Driver, but as long as the focus stayed on him, we remained victims. It was hard to speak out at first, but as I did it more frequently, I realized I could give people a voice. People like Tanya." End quote.
Wow.
She has also stated she's okay with people calling her a victim, but her chosen term is survivor. And one last thing, this amazing young woman, she's actually now a mother, and she honored her friend by naming one of her children Tanya.
How cool is that? And that's what that's like, we've talked about this when we talk about survivors. I think it's awesome when they do go on and kind of heal from this and then turn it around into something good. Like now we're going to bring awareness to what we went through and not have the focus be on this evil, disgusting human being, but on how we turned it into a positive. And that's all you can ask for.
Agreed. Just like Lorraine and Christy did with the Stacy Foundation last week. And Yeah, and Misty is like really big in like the victims advocate world, and that, my friend, is the horrendous story of the Abbotsford killer. But more importantly, it is the story of a brave, beautiful, and courageous survivor.
That is awesome, and that's exactly right. It's about a survivor, not just about this guy. So, wow, great job. That's a crazy story that I feel like I've vaguely heard about that in the past, but I've never heard it like this. I think I just knew of the case, so it was really cool
Yeah.
to dive in depth. And man, what a 2024! We have covered some incredible cases. I think
Yes.
personally, and 2025 is no slouch. So I will tell you guys that we are going to come out swinging in 2025. So Melissa is going to walk us through the case that is synonymous with evil. And that is the case of
Mm-hmm.
Theodore Bundy.
Oh
And
boy.
the reason we're doing that is because we may or may not have an interview with his cousin. Just saying. So you might want to tune in the new year to hear some super cool
Yay!
stuff. But that's it for today. That's it for today and for 2024. So you guys have been incredible. And we are so pumped that we get to continue to do this, continue sharing these stories, to talk about these victims, these survivors,
Mm-hmm.
and interview some of the people associated with the crimes and keep bringing you the content that we feel like deserves to be heard. And we hope you're liking it. So let us know.
Yes, please let us know. Also, please rate, subscribe, like. You just taking a couple minutes to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Spotify, any of them makes a huge, huge difference. Please, we beg of you.
It does.
Um,
We're not above groveling.
no, we're totally down with that. But in the meantime, if you need a little bit more MU in your world, you can check us out on Facebook, Insta, TikTok at Murder Unscripted. You can check out our website, murderunscriptedpod.com, or you can send us an email at murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com. So that is it for us. Happy 2024. Happy New Year. We will see you in 2025.
Yes, we will.
And if nothing else, going into the new year, at least remember that perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
When I heard that, it was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And then the more you think about it, I don't know if there's better advice in 2024 than perverts do not wear signs that say they're perverts.
Exactly. Look at Terry Driver, family man, pervert.
See you in 2025.
Bye. The theme for this week was from Block 6, which was Friends Till the End, where we covered cases of friends turned enemies, as well as friends who sadly met their demise together. And today is along... Bless you.
Carry on.
I don't know what I would say. I'd probably start laughing because I laugh.
You would start
when I get
laughing.
nervous.
That's
I
exactly
would,
what you say. You cannot be a 911 operator.
No. Oh, yikes. I wouldn't make it through day one.
There would be more vulgarities coming out of your mouth than the victims.
It's so true. I'd be like, you tell that guy to fuck off. And before the girls even know like what's happening, the man says, "Do you bitches want to party?"
That's what I say when I enter a room usually.
And everyone simultaneously says, "Hell no." So doctors and nurses like swarm her. Like apparently the whole ER was just like, holy shit. And you know there's probably some guy in the waiting room, his chest hurts and he's pissed off because he got...
Yeah, he cut himself cutting a pineapple and he's like, great, now I gotta...
Exactly.
He's got
That's what I kept
towels around.
thinking of.
Going, ugh.
It hurts.
Drowning's up there on my fears of ways to die. It's
Me
like number
too.
2. Fire's number 1, but drowning's sounds scary.
Fire and drowning, yeah, are definitely my top ones. That's terrifying.
I love that we share the same 2 fears of death.
Yeah,
top
and we
two.
share maroon sweatshirts.
We're like the same person.
That's why we're besties. I don't understand. You can do like pig hearts and shit, but I can't have a monkey intestine. That's
If you had monkey parts, you would never live it. I would make up so many names for you.
I hope I get them.
I do too, for my own
I'm on the
entertainment.
I'm on the transplant list. The list that I made up.
The
It's on
monkey
notebook
transplant
paper.
list.
I just gotta find a monkey willing to donate his colon. It's
I don't think
fine.
he'll have a problem. He goes home and talks to his wife about it.
I pay him with a lifetime supply of bananas.